Hello, hello, hello. We are live. Good early afternoon. I'm Andy Andrews, and you have joined us on the Blue Plate Special. We're here in Orange Beach, Alabama at Wisdom Harbor Studios at the Wharf, home of the famous Marlin statues and the world-famous escalator statues. They look just like escalators. They're the same size. Just perfect reproductions. You need to take a picture on them if you come visit. Deanna Bono Lehman, good morning from California. Marcy Grosso Taylor from Pasco, Washington, sunny and warm. It's nice here today. It's really pretty weather here. Dolores Lohman, g'day. Judith DeWitt, good morning from sunny Spokane Valley. Heather Olson in Utah. Sandra Mendonica from Searcy, Arkansas, home of Harding University, where they ate their mascot. Billy Roberts Paget from Destin. Leonard Sanchez, good morning. Hey, you're Green River, Wyoming. Green River. Do you know about the Green River knives in Green River, Wyoming? Now, I'm just going to tell you, our topic today is ridiculous history, okay? So we're going to have ridiculous history that we're going to talk about. This is some funny stuff that you probably haven't heard. We have guests in the studio today from Missouri, the Show Me State. So we're going to show you. I'm going to show you some ridiculous history. If you are new to us, we would ask that you, if you're on Facebook, that you press that notification button there and turn the notifications on your phone so that you'll be notified when we go live here. And also share, okay? This is going to be a fun show, so press that share button and share this to your page and get us going on your page. Share us with your friends. That would be great. And if you're on YouTube, press that subscribe button. We'd appreciate that. If you're not on YouTube, just sometimes go to YouTube and get on one of our broadcasts and press that subscribe button. That would help. Also, Twitter and Instagram. Hello. We are. Let's see. What I was going to tell you. I was going to tell you about Green River. James Moore says those escalator statues will stop you in your tracks. You're exactly right. Samuel from Daytona Beach. I was going to tell you about Green River. Now, this is not ridiculous history. This is real history. Green River, Wyoming. Was a Green River Knife Company, and they're actually the forebears of Dexter Knife Company, which is in Massachusetts now. But the Green River Knife Company, they made the knives that the trappers and the scouts would use. They were skinning knives, and they were really sharp, and they would also use them to fight. And they had a line on the blade that said Green River. And so occasionally when they would have these jubilees, these big things where they'd all get together and trade their furs and spend all their money for the year in one, big party. Occasionally, these guys would fight, and so they would if somebody got stabbed and got killed, their euphemism for that was he went up Green River, because the Green River on it. So that's just some history there for you. Mark Lowry, hey, thank you for sharing. And let's see, who else is here? Clint Knowles, hey, buddy, how are you? Chris Comer, Judith DeWitt. You like the shirt? There's nothing on the back. There's nothing on the back. This is it. This is from $100 Lifestyles, the big cornerstone of the wharf here. And so if you visit, after you spend some time taking your pictures with the escalator statues and see us, make sure you see the guys at $100 Lifestyle and tell them we said hi. Mike Kubik, hey, buddy. Are you checking in from Juan and Becky's? Are Juan and Becky there? Or Juan's probably working. I know you're not working. Joyce Martin Green, hey, Greencastle, Indiana. And Are you ready? You wanna let's. I've got 15 examples of ridiculous history. Now, when I call this ridiculous history, some of them are history that is wrong. Some of them are history that is misunderstood. Some of it is history that nobody knows, and but it's all kind of ridiculous. But we got 15 of them plus a bonus, and so we'll start with number 15. Then we'll take a break in the middle, say hi to a few people, and then finish it up. Number 15 is that Benjamin Franklin did not discover electricity. Okay, now a lot of people think that, but he did not discover electricity. Now, I hope that's not a shock to you, but here is the quickest way to disprove that Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity. It already had a name. I mean, that name was already in use. Electricity comes from the Greek word electron, which means amber. The Greeks discovered they could generate static electricity by rubbing amber with fur. And I don't know what they're doing other than a party trick. But what Franklin was trying to prove in his experiment was the electrical nature of lightning, that lightning was, in fact, electricity. That's what was in question. So it is true that Franklin flew a kite with a key tied to the string, but the kite was not struck by lightning. Because if it had been, Franklin, Ben might have been a has-been. Okay, but the spark that leapt from the key to Franklin's knuckle was caused by the flow of electrons that exists at all time between the ground and the sky. But during a thunderstorm, the electrons are more active. But had Benjamin Franklin, the inventor of bifocals, actually been struck by lightning, he would have made a real spectacle of himself. Okay, so number 14, there is a belief out there that the Great Wall of China can be seen from the moon. And it cannot be. Okay, now part of the mystique surrounding this thing, this idea that this engineering marvel, that the Great Wall of China is 1,864 miles long. Okay, and so I guess if somebody said it could be seen from space, that would kind of make it would be believable. Okay, but when you stop to think about this claim, it's ridiculous, all right? Because the foundation for this wall story started in 1938 when Richard Halliburton wrote his second book. It was the second book of Marvels. And in that book, he announced that the Great Wall of China is the only man-made object visible from the moon. Okay, so how could he have known that when it would be another 31 years before we actually landed on the moon? And according to astronauts, not even Earth's largest mountain ranges are visible from the moon. Okay, so this is just wrong. That it's funny to me though that his book was like the second book of Marvels, and if you've ever read any of the Ripley's Believe It or Not, hey Gene McDonald, how are you? If you've ever read any of the Ripley's Believe It or Not cartoons or little comic strips or whatever, they're not all true. And I don't know if you know that or not, but they're not all true. And Robert Ripley started that, and when he was called out on it, I mean, actually during his lifetime when he was actually doing, and he was called out on it. He didn't say, I didn't say it was true. I just said, believe it or not. So how about that? Okay, this one goes under the category, this is number 13. And number 13 goes under the category of you must have the wrong address. Okay, so I just thought this is history that most people don't know about, and I just think this is funny, and I think it's ridiculous. The Gettysburg Address is considered the most eloquent oration in U.S. history. Okay, but when the Chicago Times heard it, some reporter was there, and when they reported it, the Chicago Times hated it. On November 20th, 1863, this was the day after Lincoln delivered this famous speech, the Times wrote, "The cheek of every American must tingle with shame as he read the silly, flat, and dishwatery utterances of the man who has been pointed out to intelligent foreigners as the President of the United States." Wow. So they hated it. I mean, they didn't just dislike it. They didn't just think it was wrong. They hated it. All right, number 12. This is a very cool one. Now this, I'm calling this a hole in the bottom of the lake. And I actually first found out about this, and you can look it up. I mean, this is ridiculous. But I first found out about this when Polly and I first got married. We lived next door to Dave and Mary Ann Wink. And Dave was, he mentored me in so many ways. He could fix anything. I could fix nothing. He actually told me one time, and now I'm better than this now, but he told me, he said, can you go get a Phillips head screwdriver? And I said, is that like a brand name? I didn't know. And but Dave, he would work on stuff at our house, and I would sit there and keep him company and, hand him stuff like the brand name screwdriver that he asked for. And they were from Louisiana. And so he told me this story, and I was like, what? But this is absolutely true, okay? This is Lake Penier. It's a 1,300-acre lake that's near New Iberia, Louisiana. And it was home to Jefferson Island, and Jefferson Island was like 30-something acres, and it had a beautiful live oak gardens botanical park. And so in stark contrast to the natural beauty of this place were the oil and gas rigs that dotted the landscape. And so now this was in 1980, right? And so on the morning of November 21st, 1980, Wilson Brothers Corporation, they had been hired to drill, and they were finished setting up an oil rig in the middle of this 1,300-acre lake. And they started drilling. So a test hole was being drilled at well number 20, and things were going along fine until the drill hit 1,228 feet. So instead of, that classic movie scene of oil spewing up into the air, the engineers noted that a whirlpool had formed around the rig, and this 1,300-acre lake was quickly disappearing. The oil rig, the crew, had inadvertently drilled into the Diamond Crystal Salt Mine, which is nearby. and the lake water was pouring into the tunnels. And they watched, I mean, they're stunned, as their $5 million rig, a tugboat, 11 barges from the canal, a barge loading dock, 70 acres of Jefferson Island and its botanical gardens, parts of greenhouses, a house trailer, trucks, tractors, a parking lot, and a whole lot of other stuff went down the hole. I mean, and fortunately, one thing that didn't go down the drain was Leon Viator Jr. and his nephew Timmy, who were fishing in the lake. I mean, they were fishing in the lake, and they were in a 14-foot aluminum boat when this happened. But the water drained so quickly that their boat got stuck in the mud at the bottom of the lake, and they just walked back to shore. I mean, you know, when you think about it, it's rare that a fisherman can say he's the one that got away. But that's what happened that day. I mean, can you imagine? That blew my mind when Dave told me that story, but that's absolutely true. And it happened in minutes. So a 1,300 acre lake, that was a big hole. Okay, number 11. This is Birds of a Feather. This is in November 1977, and it wasn't. Now, yesterday here, it was raining cats and dogs. Wasn't it, Lil M? It was raining cats and dogs. You know how I knew? I stepped in a poodle. Okay, all right. So, but it was raining cats and dogs yesterday. But on this day in California, it was actually raining birds. Okay, so according to eyewitness accounts, approximately 500 dead blackbirds and pigeons dropped on the streets and the sidewalks of San Luis Obispo, California, over a period of several hours. I mean, just like dropping out of the sky over several hours, and no local spraying had occurred, and authorities still have no explanation for why the birds had died en masse over their town. But that's a different explanation of bird droppings, I'm thinking. Okay, number 10. This, I just think, now this is a ridiculous piece of history and all this actually happened. But this is ridiculous, but I just love this. I just think this is great. We're going to call this sticking his neck out. There's a large number of resolutions that pass in Congress, and people, they don't even know what they're voting on half the time, and certainly, the Texas State House is, Texas, that's just this massive state with massive population, and so a large number of resolutions pass through the Texas State House every session. And so Representative Tom Moore Jr. was concerned at how little attention legislators paid to the bills that they were voting on. So in 1971, as a joke, he introduced a bill honoring Albert DeSalvo for his work in pioneering population control. Now, if you recognize the name Albert DeSalvo, that was the Boston Strangler, who confessed to killing 13 women in the Boston area. And so Moore's bill commended the Boston Strangler for serving his country, his state, and his community. And it said, this compassionate gentleman's dedication and devotion to his work has enabled the weak and lonely throughout the nation to achieve and maintain a new degree of concern for their future. He has been officially recognized by the state of Massachusetts for his noted activities and unconventional techniques involving population control and applied psychology. The resolution passed unanimously. I'm sure that Tom Moore could barely choke back his laughter. Okay, number nine. This is nuclear history. Now, there's a lot of nuclear history that people don't know. I mean, there was a nuclear bomb lost off the coast of Georgia that a plane had to jettison, and it still has not been recovered. But this is like Miami's still there. But this is nuclear history. So while performing like routine maintenance, now this is a lot of crazy stuff seemed to happen in 1980, but this was routine maintenance. This is in September of 1980, and an Air Force repairman was working on the Titan III ICBM silo, the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile silo, and he accidentally dropped a socket wrench. And the socket bounced off the wall of the Damascus, Arkansas silo and banged into the missile. Surely a little socket wrench couldn't do any damage to a multi-million-dollar state-of-the-art rocket armed with a nuclear warhead, could it? Oh, yes, it could. The repairman is like watched in horror as this socket socked that pressurized fuel tank and started a leak. The entire missile complex and the surrounding area was evacuated, and 8 hours later, a massive explosion rumbled from the silo and blew the 740-ton hatch into the air, followed closely by the nuclear warhead. And people were watching in terror as this warhead flew 600 feet into the air. But that wasn't the scary part. The scary part was watching the warhead coming back down to the ground. Amazingly, the warhead did not explode, but the accident did kill one person, and 11 other people were injured. But I mean, that actually happened, September of 1981. And that's the old saying: one nuclear warhead can ruin your whole day. Who's with us? Who's still with us? Is anybody still with us? We got anybody here? Anybody still with us? We're going to talk about the French next, but I was just curious if anybody was here. Marcy Chrysler Taylor, 1980s. Yeah, 1980s when Mount St. Helens blew its top in Washington State. 1980. And Heather Olsen, you were born in 1980? Maybe you were the cause of all this, I'm thinking. Chris Comer says I'm full of punny stuff today. And Christy, my sister, says, I am so corny. This is not corny. This is like history. This is the kind of stuff that I would have liked to have learned in history class. Wait, go back to Monica Early. I want to see Monica Early. Monica Early says, great to see you today. Work and life has kept me from the lunchtime fun. Hope to see you soon. I hope to see you too, Monica Early. Do you know Monica Early was the protocol officer for special operations? And so when people would get to be generals, and Monica was the one who would teach them, I guess, how to eat in public and the protocol about meeting the, royalty. And I know the first special ops general that I worked for, General Mike Woolley, and the boys called his wife Mrs. General Woolley. But Monica Early, she taught them, and they ended up, when he was based, I think, at Lakenheath in England. They were invited to dine with the Queen of England, and Kathy Woolley sat right next to Prince Philip. And so I guess they were thanking God for Monica early right then. Monica, I would see Monica every time I would go over there and work with the squadron commanders. And we were always nervous if Monica ended up at our table, like for dinner. We're like, oh no, she's watching everything we do. Nadine Sanders, hey. Diana Torres, Judy Pruitt Sharpless from Bedford, Texas. Okay, all right, let's keep going. You ready to keep going? We're on number 8. We're going to talk about the French here. Now, this was in 1883. And again, all this stuff actually happened. There's not, you have to be like me and be doing weird research to run across some of this stuff. But in 1883, the citizens of La Hare, so a small town in southern Spain, were absolutely incensed when reports came back that while visiting Paris, King Alfonso XII had been insulted and attacked. And so the mayor of Diary, which was a town, Don Miguel Garcia says, and all 300 citizens of the town demanded retribution, and this town declared war on France on October 14th, 1883. No kidding. Not a single shot was fired. No injuries were sustained during the confrontation. Nevertheless, the mayor became known as the Terror of the Sierras for this exploit. And 93 years later, in 1976, King Juan Carlos, who's Alfonso's great-grandson, made a visit to France during which he was treated with great respect. And so in 1981, the town council of La Hare ruled that in view of the excellent attitude of the French, they would suspend hostilities and agree to a ceasefire with France. The current mayor of La Hare, Diego Sanchez, said humbly, "We have forgiven them now." And that makes this the first time in 2 centuries that France fought a war and didn't lose. Okay, number 7. God announcing a verdict. The Pacific Gas and Electricity Company was on trial in the year 2000 in Nevada City, California, and they were charged with failing to trim vegetation around power lines. The trial was delayed for more than 30 minutes when the power to the town was accidentally cut off because a tree branch had fallen and knocked down a power line. It's events like these that strengthen your belief in God, doesn't it? And they show you that God's got a sense of humor. Number 6, this is an imagined history. Now, you will remember, this is one of the most famous paintings in American history. It's Washington crossing the Delaware. This is one of the most recognizable paintings in history. It just stirs your blood. It's brave General Washington standing up in the front of the boat, remember, leading his men across the river to surprise the British at the Battle of Trenton on Christmas Eve, 1776. I mean, this has all the elements of true Americana, right? George Washington, Christmas, weary soldiers. The only thing it didn't have is facts. A German-American artist named Emanuel Lutz painted the work in 1851. So he he did this painting in 1851, which was 75 years after the battle. Okay, so he used American tourists as models and used the Rhine River as a substitute for the Delaware River. He got the style of the boat wrong, the clothing was incorrect, and even the American flag was wrong because the flag that's in the painting had not been created yet. But why let facts get in the way of a little history, right? And it's a nice painting. But that would go well today. Why let the facts get in the way of a little history? Okay, number 5. I call this one, Will Someone Please Invent Kleenex? Okay, during Napoleon's day. This is during Napoleon's day. Now, when you see military uniforms, they have these brass buttons everywhere. Well, brass buttons on the sleeves of military uniforms, they don't actually button up anything, but they serve a purpose. It was in 1812, while the French army was freezing in Russia in the dead of winter, and Napoleon got tired of watching his soldiers wipe their noses with their sleeves. And so he ordered the brass buttons removed from the uniforms of the dead and sewn onto his soldiers' sleeves to curb the habit. I mean, that's gross, but that's true. I mean, took the dead soldiers' buttons and sewed it on the sleeves, keep them from wiping their nose. I mean, what are they supposed to do? Just drip, I guess? All right. This one's going to make you mad. This one's going to make you mad. I call this a twist of lemming. Okay. You know about lemmings, right? You know the story of the lemmings, overpopulating and just running to the cliff and committing mass suicide. Okay, that's a myth. Lemmings do not commit mass suicide. But the origin of this lemming tale can be traced to the 1958 Walt Disney film White Wilderness, where one scene shows a dozen lemmings scurrying toward the edge of a cliff, where they dutifully toss themselves over a cliff into certain death in icy Arctic waters. That's what the film shows. White Wilderness, Walt Disney. Believe it or not, the filmmakers staged the suicide scene. But when the lemmings refused to voluntarily go along with it, they were tossed off the cliff by the film crew. And the narration is, gradually strength wanes, determination ebbs away, and the Arctic Sea is dotted with tiny bobbing bodies. Yeah, I mean, you would think that the Disney company, which made a fortune off a mouse, would have been kinder to its relatives. But that's absolutely true. Can I do that narration again? I'd like to do that again. Okay, so they throw the lemmings off, the film crew throws the lemmings off the cliff, and the narrator says, gradually strength wanes, determination ebbs away, and the Arctic Sea is dotted with tiny bobbing bodies. It's the wonderful world of Disney. Whew. Okay, number 3, down the tube. Now this is another in the whoops category. Okay, there's a worker in September 1978 2 years before 1980, when he didn't know he was supposed to wait 2 years to accidentally drop a 50-cent paint scraper into a torpedo launcher of a nuclear submarine. This is the U.S. nuclear submarine Swordfish, and it jammed the loading piston. So since the submarine was still at sea, divers worked for a week attempting to free the piston without success. Ultimately, the Swordfish had to be put in dry dock, where repairs ended up costing in 1978 $171,000. Of course, knowing the government, the 50-cent paint scraper was probably purchased for $171,000 too. Okay, now we're down to number 2. You still with me? Number 2. We're going to call this one Bending the Amendment. This is something I've known about for a long time. But this is something you just don't ever hear. But in any debate over prayer in school, nativity scenes, or Christmas trees, or crosses on state property, or statues of the Ten Commandments in courthouses, the wall of separation between church and state, as outlined in the Constitution, is bound to be brought up, which is an interesting argument because there is no wall of separation between church and state mentioned anywhere in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment states only that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's it. The Founding Fathers included this amendment because they didn't want the United States to establish a national church like the Church of England, which is one of the reasons the Founding Fathers took the time to write everything down. But no one, evidently, not even the courts, takes time to read it. Okay, here we go with number 1, and we have a bonus, so just wait for the bonus, but this is number 1. Number 1 is Hypocrisy Day. This was 1990, April 22nd, 1990. It was designated Earth Day, and it was celebrated by hundreds of thousands of people gathered in New York Central Park to express their support for environmental programs. Earth Day. When the event was over, more than memories were left behind. 50 park sanitation workers picked up 1,543 tons of litter the concerned demonstrators had left behind. Okay. All right. Now, you ready for the bonus? This is a bonus. Now, I'm just giving this as a bonus because it has no historical significance, but this is real ridiculous history. And this is just funny to me. Okay, so I'm calling this 2 Kings and 3 Queens. Okay? Now, this happened in 1939. And this was during a trip across Canada. King George VI and his wife, Queen Elizabeth, were greeted by the Canadian Prime Minister, Mackenzie King. Also greeted by the Mayor of Winnipeg and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. John Queen. So in a bizarre but very true variation of Abbott and Costello's Who's on First routine, Here is I'm going to read you a partial transcript from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and their announcement of the event. All right, here's what was said. There's the king. He's stepping out, followed by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, nattily attired in a silver coat. Mr. King is now shaking hands with the king and introducing Mr. Queen to the king and queen, and then Mrs. Queen to the queen and king. They're now proceeding up the steps to the well-decorated city hall, the king and Mr. King together, with the queen being escorted by Mrs. Queen. The king leaves Mr. King and goes to Mrs. Queen, and the queen and Mr. King follow behind. Is that great? Okay. Well, there is your ridiculous history lesson for today. We'll be back. What is today? Today's Thursday, isn't it? Okay. This is present. This is not history, so I don't have a grasp on the present. But we will be back Tuesday with another Blue Plate special for you, and that's the Ridiculous History Blue Plate special for today. Bye-bye.